In the 1950s, medical orthodoxy treated human contact as the enemy. Standard pediatric practice mandated keeping infants in strictly sterile, isolated environments to prevent disease and discourage dependency. This approach was underpinned by the prevailing scientific consensus of the era, known as cupboard theory. Behaviorists argued that infants do not naturally love their mothers. Instead, a baby merely learns to bond with whoever provides food, associating the caregiver entirely with the reduction of hunger. The chief architect of this anti-cuddling movement was John B. Watson, a powerful president of the American Psychological Association. Watson delivered a specific, chilling warning to parents. He claimed that motherly love was a dangerous instrument and that excessive holding and kissing would inflict permanent damage, creating weak, clingy adolescents and dysfunctional spouses. In this clinical framework, a mother's physical affection was treated as a psychological pathogen, a sentimental hazard to be rigorously managed. Psychologist Harry Harlow, working out of his primate laboratory, decided to empirically test this consensus. He wanted to measure whether love was truly just a byproduct of survival. His experimental design required absolute, brutal control over developmental inputs. Inside these cages, he installed two artificial surrogate mothers. The first was the wire mother. Constructed from a cold, bare metal cylinder and equipped with a milk bottle, it represented pure biological sustenance and the strict logic of cupboard theory. The second was the cloth mother. This surrogate was wrapped in soft terry cloth and warmed by a light bulb, but it was utterly devoid of food or life-saving nourishment. The hypothesis was strict. If the behaviorist establishment was right, the infant monkeys should ignore the useless cloth and bond exclusively with the wire machine keeping them alive. Harlow engineered a direct, high-stakes showdown in the laboratory between the rigid mechanics of biological survival and the unquantifiable nature of affection. This chart displays the staggering empirical results. The top solid line reveals infant monkeys spent up to 18 hours a day clinging to the non-feeding cloth mother. The data permanently destroyed cupboard theory, proving affection operates entirely independently from hunger. Harlow defined this revolutionary concept as contact comfort. He established that the drive for physical touch and warmth is a primary biological necessity, just as fundamental to mammalian life as the need for water or calories. To observe the limits of this bond, Harlow introduced the fear test. He dropped terrifying mechanical toys into the cages to observe how the infants managed their panic. The terrified infants bypassed the feeding wire mother entirely. They fled directly to the cloth mother, using her physical form as a secure base to regulate their terror, before carefully turning to explore the threat. This proximity provided a mechanism for emotional regulation. After obtaining comfort, the infants transitioned from terror to curiosity, eventually finding the confidence to manipulate the very objects that had initially paralyzed them. But as Harlow's own clinical depression worsened, his experiments took a much darker turn. He shifted his focus from the protective presence of comfort to the absolute void of isolation. He introduced an apparatus he called the pit of despair. It was an inverted, stainless steel vertical chamber designed to strip away all stimuli, light, and social contact from an infant monkey. The subjects who eventually emerged from this pit were left in total psychological ruin. They were left paralyzed by absolute fear, rocking endlessly and clutching themselves in a state of permanent catatonia. Harlow then pushed the deprivation further. He took these permanently unsocialized, ruined females and strapped them to a device he named the rape rack, forcing them to breed and become mothers themselves. The behavioral outcomes were devastating. Having never experienced connection, these mothers lacked all social instinct entirely, violently neglecting, violently rejecting, and sometimes physically mutilating their own babies. Surviving physical isolation doesn't simply leave an animal lonely. It creates a psychological vacuum that violently consumes the next generation. The evidence gathered in these cages forced a pivot in psychological thought. It systematically stripped behaviorism of its authority and provided the empirical baseline for what we now know as attachment theory. The modern scientific consensus is built directly on this data. Maternal responsiveness and skin-to-skin contact are recognized as non-negotiable requirements for healthy neurological development. Tactile interaction serves as the structural support for the developing mind. It is a biological requirement for the neurological systems that regulate stress and enable future social survival. This leaves Harlow with a remarkably complex, haunting legacy. The man who proved to the world that love is a biological necessity did so by engineering the most sophisticated machines of psychological torture ever built. In the absence of connection, the psyche loses its capacity to interact with reality. Without the vital warmth of a social bond, the mind starves, eventually retreating completely into total isolation and madness.